All right. Well, hi there, folks. Looks like most folks are joining us. Good afternoon for those of you joining us live this afternoon. Thank you so much. We are glad to have you tuning in to today's event to learn all about Central Oregon's birds. I am a beginning birder myself, so I will be right with you learning and excited to learn from Ben today. My name is Rebecca. I am an outreach associate for the Deschutes Land Trust and will be doing my best to facilitate our event today. As a reminder, our presenter will be the only one with a mic on during our presentation. This was just to help us hear more clearly and also helps the rest of us focus on learning those birds. We will be sharing additional information and resources in a follow-up email after this event, so don't fret if you miss out on something important or exciting. Without having our virtual, without having our in-person walks and hikes, going off yet this year, we are excited to be able to host some virtual ones. So for those of you who aren't yet familiar with the Deschutes Land Trust, we are a conservation organization local to Bend, Oregon. We currently protect and care for over 17,000 acres of critical wildlife habitat, incredible streams, and the stunning natural beauty of this area. Like I mentioned, those in-person walks and hikes are a little bit different this year as we continue to assess the COVID-19 precautions. Look out on our calendar though, because we will be hosting some in-person walks and hikes and they're gonna pop up there very soon, so be sure to check that out. In the meantime, these virtual events are bringing the nature of Central Oregon right into your home or your bedroom or your kitchen or wherever you're at. If you're enjoying this virtual content like today's talk, or other talks that we'll have in the future, please do consider making small donations to the Land Trust. Your support will conserve and protect the nature of Central Oregon and the places that these birds need. So I'll be linking a donation link into the chat and you can use that to show your support. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Ben Ward. Ben hails from the mountains of Northern California, where he spent his childhood years between the Sierra Nevada foothills and the redwood giants of Humboldt County. For the past 15 years, Ben has in some capacity worked in the outdoors, mostly as a field biologist for an environmental consulting firm, where he conducts mostly bat and bird surveys during summer field sessions. For many years, he worked as a backpacking guide, outdoor educator, and as program director for a teen adventure camp in the Santa Cruz Mountains. In 2018, he relocated to Bend, lucky for us, to finish his degree in natural resources at OSU Cascades. Ben is excited to help people connect with the land on which we live, along with his passion for ecology. He loves to rock climb, trail run, fly fish, travel, and read an occasional good poem, and we think maybe do a little bit of birding. So thanks for being with us here today, Ben. I'll pass it over to you to get us started.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. Hello, everybody. All right. In the wrong spot. All right. Well, welcome to Central Oregon Birds to Know. As Rebecca said, my name is Ben, and I've had the good pleasure of working a wild turkey in my hand that I happened to run across my foot while I was doing some bird surveys in Virginia. And in this lower picture here is a Rufous morph eastern screech owl that I caught while doing some bat surveys down in central Louisiana. So always a good chance to work with animals out in the field. And I'm excited to be able to share the good opportunity I've had, the experiences I've had, and with you here today. So a couple things I wanted to note. First and foremost is that we are on the soon to be here full-fledged force of spring migration. And spring migration is an exciting time for us bird nerds because there are birds coming up either from other parts of the continent here in North America regionally, or they're coming from places like South America. And this map that I have here is of the Swainson's thrush migration. It was a study done by the National Park Service, and they tagged a number of individuals from various national parks. And you can see just how far these birds are flying. I mean, the birds that were caught in Denali National Park in Alaska, flying all the way down through the Amazon, is an incredible feat of travel. And the point I want to make about migration is that we live in an interconnected world, and birds, along with other animals such as butterflies and even humans, will travel across a variety of landscapes in order to utilize resources for their needs at any given time in the year. And so birds are using resources in the tropics and Central America and Mexico during the winter months. And during the summer, it behooves them to fly north and capitalize on resources that are available for their nesting needs as they're raising young and the like. And so I hope that if you are interested in conservation, that you consider some of the threats that are facing animals like birds or monarchs, because they're at risk of losing habitat both in their summer breeding grounds here in North America, but also in places like Central and South America as well. So that's the first note. The second note is that it is really difficult to pick just 10 birds to cover. And so I had two criteria. One was that they need to be common, especially if you're new to this area or just new to birding, but also these are birds that I just find interesting. So there's no real rhyme or reason except for that you're probably going to see them if you start looking, and they are birds that I think are good to know. So let's get started. All right, the first is the lovely American Dipper, denizen of the rivers and fast-flowing streams of the mountains of the West. And I'll come back to this slide. We'll talk more about its ID features. The American Dipper is found almost exclusively along fast-flowing streams, where it is foraging for underwater insects, and they often are perching. Let me go back, or it's not perching, but they're hanging out on rocks right above the surface of the water, and they'll walk into the stream to forage for insects, and sometimes they'll even dive down. And they're remarkable in that they can sustain themselves in fast-moving water. So if you go down to the Deschutes River, you'll see them. I see them very reliably just above Dillon Falls. And if you listen, you'll oftentimes throughout the year, you'll hear their call is pretty distinctive. I don't know how to hear on that. And during this time of the year, getting into April and whatnot, you'll hear their song, which is kind of wren-like. And if you hear these birds, if you look, you'll see them. They'll be flying fast and low across the surface of the water. And usually you'll see them doing this very distinctive behavior, which is dipping or bobbing, where their entire body is kind of coming up and down like this. And they're really cute. Some scientists think that it's a mechanism for communicating with other members of the same species, or to alert potential predators such as humans that they have a level of fitness. They're ready to escape should they try to be predated on. They're here year round. As it says in the note, they used to be known as the water ouzel, which I think is a great name. And so here's their song. I can get it here. Very wren-like call in some ways. All right, so that was the American Dipper. On to the red-tailed hawk, ubiquitous raptor of the West. I love this picture of this juvenile red-tailed hawk taking off. We'll come back in a second to why it is a juvenile. They're going to be, you can find them just about anywhere in our area. Our Central Oregon is just red-tailed habitat through and through. You'll find them perched up on telephone poles. You can see them on tops of trees. They'll be on the edge of the woods or broken woodlands, near fields, and they are the raptor that all other raptors are compared against. So if you can get to know the red tail, then and understand some of their ID features, then it will allow you to ID some of the other raptors that we have in our area. They're also here year round, but raptors, along with other smaller neotropical migrants, also migrate. So we probably in the winter, on any given year, we have both residents and birds who are here just for the winter and then move on to other places throughout the year. So I want to first play you the infamous call of the red-tailed hawk, which you'll often hear in movies. It's associated with eagles, and that is just not accurate. So there's the red-tailed. And red-tails are frequently imitated. They're imitated by members of the Corvid family in our area, especially the Steller's jay. And sometimes I'll be walking along and I'll hear what I think is a red-tailed, but it will sound strange and it will sound like it's coming from the brush or the middle of the tree. And oftentimes it's Steller's jay imitating a red-tailed hawk. And one thing I'll point out about calls that are recorded is sometimes the overall essence of the call, I guess you could say, is communicated, but the way that it carries in the open air is a very distinct thing. So if you find yourself with a bird guide or app that has calls, sometimes it won't sound exactly how it does out in the field. So let's look at a video of a red tail flying, and this is how you tend to see them. We'll point out a couple ID features here. So you'll see it like this flying in the air, and you'll be like, what is that? So first thing I want to point out right there is this, what's called a dark leading edge around the edge of the feathers here. That's a pretty good ID feature for red-tailed hawks. In our area, most of the red tails have a light kind of buff colored breast. There are what's known as dark morph red-tailed hawks along with other dark morph raptors, but those tend to be fewer rather than more frequent. It's got kind of this dark shoulder here, and then you'll see as it kind of, so as the video zooms in, you'll see its golden, darker colored head contrasting with its light colored underside. So there you can really see that dark head. And one thing I'll point out is oftentimes when you're looking up into the sky with your binoculars, the underneath side of the tail looks light colored. And unless the sun is directly shining through that tail and directly into your eye, it's hard to see the red on the tail. So as it flies around, you can kind of pick out a little bit of that red. And you know, red tails are a dime a dozen, but look, it's calling right there in the middle of that shot. That's so cool. It never gets old. It just never does. I mean, I see these hawks, multiple times a week, and it always makes me happy. One thing I want to point out here is their wings are very broad for the relative size, compared to the relative size of their body. And it's hard to see in this shot, but I feel like their wings are kind of forward a little bit toward their head. And they also have what's called, they generally hold their wings flat, but oftentimes they hold their wings at what's called a really, really slight dihedral, which is slightly up, kind of like this. And let's see if we can get that here in another shot. So as you learn some of these diagnostic features, there you can see how its wings are kind of uplifted above the lateral plane of its body. And other hawks have, and other raptors have different wing shape. They have different, they hold their wings in different ways. Now this hawk is going to go into this really cool dive bomb. I know we're spending a little bit of time here on these raptors, but they're such a charismatic animal. And here it's going to swoop in, not on prey, but aha, my favorite perch. All right, so that's the red-tailed hawk. Let's get back to our slideshow. All right, next is the Lewis's woodpecker, one of my favorite woodpeckers because I looked for this bird for so long when I was first getting into birding. And when I finally saw some up in the Salmon River watershed, I was so excited. And then I moved to Bend, and they're not all that uncommon, but I still get really excited to see them. They have this beautiful salmon pink belly and almost metallic green back, and then this raspberry red face. And they are quite the charismatic critter, I think. So Lewis's woodpeckers are, in my experience, they're always associated not only in riparian areas, but even more so in formerly burnt areas. They're not the best or strongest excavator, and so they depend on other woodpeckers such as northern flickers, which we'll talk about later, for cavities, which they use for nesting and the like. A lot of woodpeckers will fly catch, especially some of the smaller woodpeckers or even the acorn woodpecker, but they do, as I say, what's called fly catching, where they'll hang out on a perch and then they'll fly up and grab an insect from the air and come back down. They fly a little bit different than other woodpeckers. Many woodpeckers have this undulating flight, or they'll flap, 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 and so they'll get high and then they'll come down kind of low. And Lewis's woodpecker have that a little bit, but they tend to be a little bit more direct. And supposedly they're here year round. I've never seen one here in the wintertime, which doesn't mean they won't show up from time to time. And that's an important thing to recognize, is that birds can fly and they have their own free will. And sometimes they're around and sometimes they're not, which is the case, I think, for mountain bluebirds this last year, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. One thing I want to point out about woodpeckers that I think is really special and unique is because they spend so much time on trees, they have some adaptations to help them. Of course, they're known for, picking and excavating wood, but they also have these really unique tails. And it's hard to see in this picture, but if you look down at its tail, and you can kind of see how it's pointed a little bit. And woodpecker tail feathers are reinforced to help them have a mechanical advantage as they're clinging to the side of a tree. And so I don't have a Lewis's woodpecker feather, but I do have a northern flicker feather. And right here, you can see the very end of this feather, tail feather. It actually has these recurved feathers that have a little barb on them, and I can actually feel them catching on my finger there. And those feathers help the bird have a mechanical or friction advantage as it's on the tree. And so that's just a really neat adaptation that woodpeckers have, and that I wanted to share with you. So let's listen to the call of Lewis's woodpecker. Such interesting sounds. All right, so that's the Lewis's woodpecker. Whoops, moving on. Okay, California scrub jay, a very common denizen of urban landscapes, but also shrub scrub land and oftentimes lowland woodlands, but also along the coast. Scrub jays have recently, I think as recently as 2016, they've been split from the Western scrub jay into now California and Woodhouse's scrub jay. And one thing that's kind of funny is if you look at the range maps for Woodhouses and a California scrub jay, their ranges don't come up into Bend or Central Oregon really at all. So I'm not sure. I haven't read any recent research on which one of these species is supposedly here. My guess is that it might be the California scrub jay coming over and down from the coast. But if those two, what are now two distinct populations, are meeting here in the middle, then there'd be a good chance that they are hybridizing, which happens in all sorts of species of birds, pretty common thing. So an old professor of mine told me that previously scrub jays were not very common here in Bend, and that they have been expanding in our area quite a bit over the last 5 to 10 years. Scrub jays are part of the corvid family, so they're related to other jays, pinyon jays, Steller's jay, Mexican jay, and they're also related to crows and ravens, and they are all very intelligent and very adaptable to many different types of habitat. And scrub jays are no different. And the other jay that we have very commonly in town is the Steller's jay. And the Steller's jay, you can differentiate the two because scrub jay has this much more gray, white breast and belly, and this white eye stripe here. And then it also lacks the black mohawk that Steller's jay will have. They're both very noisy, and I have an individual here, very commonly heard. We hear both of these calls. You can hear a Western meadowlark there in the background. So you'll hear that on their own, and then you'll also hear them in a big group. There's a quail in the background somewhere. So it's worth noting too that jays, along with being really intelligent and being adaptable, they have a lot of different calls and different vocalizations that are unique. And I'm still being surprised by, I'll hear something, I'm like, what is that? Turns out it's a jay of some kind. And so that's one thing to be aware of as you're learning some of these calls, is that there's always lots of variation, and it is pretty incredible. So that's the California scrub jay. On to the Western meadowlark, a beautiful bird of open spaces and grasslands, and their voices are this beautiful lilting voice that comes on over the air, and it is just a wonderful thing to hear. I'm going to play that first for you, actually. And I'll say this too, this is another one of those calls that it's just not, the recording just doesn't do the quality of sound justice. So bear that in mind. You also hear them with horned larks and other grassland species like savanna sparrow as well. So Western meadowlarks are a member of the Icterid family. They're related to bobolinks and blackbirds, which would include Brewer's blackbirds, red-winged blackbirds, and also orioles. And as I said, I'll find them in real open areas. I see them up, if you know where Klein Butte is at, I see them up there a fair bit up toward Redmond, and kind of interspersed trees, but mostly, real open territory and fairly dry as well. Stronella neglecta. Neglecta, this is just a fun fact, means that it refers to the fact that Western meadowlark was overlooked as a distinct species from Eastern meadowlark, which you can really distinguish. Their song is similar, but definitely different. And one thing that's really neat about the icterids and the meadowlark in particular is that it has a very strong, you can see the bill is long and it has a modified musculature that allows it to not only pierce the ground, but then open the bill outward, and it has increased strength in opening that bill against the pressure from soil in order to forage. And so that's a neat adaptation that they have developed in order to more efficiently forage for food. And supposedly they're year-round here, and again, maybe they are, but I've never seen them in the wintertime here, and I just recently saw them. So whether they're here all along or they are actually back, they are back. And they're not quite singing yet, but they are. I've flushed a couple of them out on a run and driving out. And oh, one thing I'll mention about the Western meadowlark is oftentimes you'll hear them first, and if you can hear them, then if you scan your horizon, usually you'll see them. They'll get out on a perch, and they'll be singing nice and loud. And they're just it's one of those birds. It's like the red-tailed hawk. It never really gets old. All right, on to the northern flicker, another woodpecker, and who this fine feather is from. And the northern flicker, we're looking at a male right now, and you can tell because this red grouping of feathers is called a malar, and the males have a red malar and females have more of a gray or brown color to that. They have this beautiful black chest plate and a spotted breast. And when they fly past you, you'll see there's a couple of things that make them really easy to distinguish while they're flying on wing, which is not true for all birds, but for these guys it is. They're a little bit bigger and longer than I'd say a little bit longer than a robin. And they have their tail, underside of their tail, which this feather is a tail. Their tail and their wing feathers are a really brilliant orange. The eastern variant of the northern flicker has yellow. The other ID feature you can see while they're flying by is they have a big white rump, which is actually common to a lot of different woodpeckers. And the rump is basically just the space in between the back and the tail. And so you can make a good ID on them as they're flying by you from the underside or from on top. So northern flickers are all over the place. You can find them in anywhere in any wooded environment, be it the juniper savanna or more of our pine woods further upslope near Bend. They're all over in town. Excuse me. They're a little bit different from other woodpeckers who utilize trees for foraging as well as nesting. You'll see them on the ground a lot looking for ants and beetles. One thing about woodpeckers that is really unique is, of course, that they are drumming. So they communicate with other birds, not only by voice, but by vocalization. And I've long wanted to spend the time to get to know woodpeckers well enough to recognize them by their drumming, but there's much to do in little time. So the other really great feature about woodpeckers is their elongated tongue, and it's part of what's a physiological apparatus called a hyoid apparatus. And basically the tongue, you can see in this upper part of this image, is retracted, and it goes through this assemblage of cartilage and bone and muscle. And when they want to extend their tongue, it comes down through, past their eye, and out. And northern flickers can extend their tongue up to, I think, about 2 inches. Some woodpeckers can extend their tongue as much as 5 inches, which is pretty incredible. And so they'll excavate or dig, and then they'll stick their tongue in and look for various insects. So the call you'll hear a lot, that you'll hear these guys just as much as you'll see them. I hear this call year round. Pretty ubiquitous sound. And here, right now during the spring, what I've noticed, this is an anecdotal observation. From what I can tell, during the spring, they tend to utilize this click, 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 click call. It's pretty loud and obnoxious, but I've been hearing them up from at the top of trees utilizing that call. So my hypothesis is that as breeding and nesting season becomes nearer, that they're using these calls to establish territory or attract mates. And it's a good moment to just take a quick note and talk a little bit about how birds communicate with each other. You probably already are at least aware that when birds are singing, they are communicating with other conspecifics and heterospecifics, in that it is worth their energy to takes less energy to sing to establish their territory and attract mates than it does to by other means, which they do that as well. But by singing or utilizing calls, it's an efficient way to communicate, this is my territory, or I want you to come over here and mate with me and nest. And so there's a number of reasons why birds sing. That's a couple. Oh. All right. The lovely tree swallow, aerial master of the sky, searching for insects and also a harbinger of spring. I always feel like when the swallows get back, because they're neotropical migrants, I think it is warm weather is here, the insects are out, which means the tree swallows are around, and it's always a good sign. And tree swallows are extremely common. They are, as I said, they're neotropical migrants, so they're coming up from more southern areas, southern latitudes, and they have this really beautiful iridescent blue and sometimes iridescent green feathers on the top, and then this really clean white belly. You'll see them flying. They can be in flocks, but also a little bit more individual. Some swallows are more social than others. The violet green swallow, which is another swallow that we have in our area, I think tends to be a little bit more social. We have a box right outside of our bedroom window, and there's a pair of tree swallows that's been using it the last couple years that we've been around. We see them every spring, and they will take time. You'll see them perched, as you see here, on a power line or any type of cable or a fence. You'll see them lined up when they're taking a break. And swallows are really fun to watch. If you want to be an advanced binocular bird watcher, then you can train on swallows because they're flying all over the place. And they're insectivorous. You can find them over any field, wetland. If you ever go down to Summer Lake, there's a bunch of tree swallows down that way. And they are cavity nesters. So they're using boxes, or if you've ever seen a mud swallow, or a mud nest made by swallows up in the eaves of various buildings, that's from swallows. So they're a great little bird, pretty common. And if you're just starting out with learning your birds, it can be a little overwhelming at times to learn the songs as well, but it's a primary way that people are identifying birds to species. And even if you don't recognize what you're hearing, just by paying attention to the fact, like, oh, I hear a bird, what might that be? And so learning these common birds, learning their songs, is a great way to help you identify and appreciate these animals, because they're all really unique and also can be quite challenging, and it's makes it for an interesting experience. I'm still learning new songs, and I'm constantly surprised by birds who have similar sounding calls or songs as well, and that is quite interesting. The northern flicker and pileated woodpecker have a very similar sounding call. That's just one example. So yeah, it's fun. Oh, all right. On to the warble. Some warblers. The yellow warbler. They are beautiful little migrants that come up, and warblers are oftentimes very colorful and hard to see. Can be challenging to identify by voice. They present a really good challenge. Here in the West, we have several warbler species. The richest diversity of species you'll see is back east in Appalachia. And this bird, the yellow warbler, is a very conspicuous and widespread warbler that you'll see oftentimes in wet shrubby environments and habitats. I see them along the Metolius River quite a bit, and also the Deschutes River and wetland areas. And they have this, they're the only all yellow bird, yellow warbler, I should say, with this fine reddish streaking. And so there's another warbler that is also yellow, almost all yellow. It's called a Wilson's warbler, but it has a little black cap right up here, and it's, I think, a little bit smaller. As it says, so one of the few female warblers who will also sing. There are some species of birds, of course, where the females are making vocalizations and singing, but not necessarily a full song. And yellow warblers happens to be one of those species. So here's their song. And for whatever reason, yellow warbler is a really hard bird for me to remember their song. I get it mixed up all the time, and I've been listening to them for a good number of years at this point, and I still have to, when I hear it in the beginning of the season, it's like I know it, and then I can't quite place what it is. So I think there will always be those species for us where you just can't quite place the call, and yellow warbler is one of those for me. One thing about where you can find it is, now I don't want to say that this is gospel. You can take it with a grain of salt. I tend to see yellow warblers a little bit higher in the brush as opposed to down really low, like a McGillivray's warbler and other species like wrens and things like that, where they're low and dense brush. And yellow warbler is another one of those birds where if you can hear it, then there's a good chance you can probably see it out on a perch somewhere being conspicuous. Might be somebody out there who disagrees with me. That's been my that's been my experience. So look for yellow warblers along rivers and brushy habitats, willow, and along wetlands as well. Oh, all right. Oh yes, the mountain bluebird. Such a lovely, lovely animal that just contrasts so nicely with the gray and brown of its habitat. It's such a striking color. And this is a male mountain bluebird. Females tend to have a little bit more gray, and you can distinguish them from their closely related western bluebird, because western bluebirds will have more of a rufous breast right here and coming down on past their scapulars as well. Mountain bluebird is just blue all over, and another one of those birds that just is so colorful and never gets old. Mountain bluebirds belong with the thrush family, so they're related to robins, Townsend solitaires, western bluebird, which is kind of a funny thing. Yeah. But when you start getting to know the shape of thrushes, sometimes when you see a mountain bluebird from far away, especially if it's backlit and especially if it's a female, sometimes you're like, it looks like a thrush of some kind, and then it clicks. You're like, oh, it's probably a mountain bluebird. So anyway, keep that in mind. You'll find mountain bluebirds in kind of open areas, similar to where you might find western meadowlarks. although they tend to be around where there's sparse trees or shrubs. And I think part of that is because they'll do what's called ground sallying. And sallying is where the bluebird will be up on a perch, and then it will spot some prey down below, and it will lift off, and then it will hover momentarily as it finds its prey, and then it'll go down, grab that insect, and go back to its perch. And so and Western bluebirds do that as well. And so if you see that, that can help you make the identification of what kind of bird it is. So it's probably a bluebird, as opposed to, say, a flycatcher, which will be on a perch and fly straight up to catch an insect. They also just read this, that males will mime nest building, to where they'll basically pretend, I think it's when they're with a new mate or they're trying to attract a mate, they'll pretend to have nesting material, and then they either won't have the nesting material or they'll drop it on the way, and then the female actually does all the work to build the nest. So kind of jerks. But another bird that is supposedly year-round here, and in the last couple of winters I haven't seen them, although this year I've been seeing mountain bluebirds throughout the winter close to Bend. So my guess is that they are regional migrants, and sometimes they're here and sometimes they're not. Maybe winters are less harsh. Of course, what is less harsh? That's debatable depending on who you ask. So here's their song. They're very cute, and they're another one of those birds that oftentimes you'll hear, and then you can look above or out to the horizon and you can see them as they're passing by. So keep an eye out for mountain bluebirds. They're great. Oh. All right. Last but not least, I think, is the golden crowned sparrow. And the golden crowned sparrow, I'd be remiss not to have at least some sparrow species here, is a winter resident but is not here year-round. So this is one of those migrants that comes down from Canada and Alaska and overwinters in our area because of the available resources, I suppose. And then they're gone come mid to late spring. And you'll find them with white-crowned sparrows. They're very similar. The white-crowned sparrows have this similar white barring on the side of their wings here. They're in the same genus. And this is the breeding plumage of a golden crowned sparrow. They have a beautiful song. And let's take a listen. We'll listen to their song in their breeding grounds. This one is from Alaska. Very similar to a white-throated sparrow, which is a bird you'll find back east. Also in the same genus. And here is a recording from a very similar sounding a song of California during the wintertime. All right. So they're you really don't hear them vocalizing their song that much in the winter. I think I may have heard one this morning when I was outside for a hot second. I'll start hearing them a little bit this time of year, and then they kind of take off. But you'll see them on the ground in weedy or brushy areas. We have a big snow brush complex, if you will, where a lot of sparrows and juncos like to hang out, and these guys have been there quite a bit this year. They'll also, if you have a feeder, they'll also pop out into underneath and grab seeds. And it's worth noting, and I think I've already mentioned this, but in case I haven't, many birds are omnivorous, and so they're utilizing different resources at different times of the year. And so for many, that means in the summertime, they are insectivorous, and in the wintertime, they're eating seeds and berries and things like that. Cedar waxwings are that way. as well, actually. All right, that's it. 10 birds of Central Oregon. If you all made it through that, then I thank you. And I'm glad that y'all were able to go on that little virtual journey with me. So I'll pass it back off to Rebecca.
Thanks, Ben. That's lots of great birds. It's great to see them and hear them and watch some of them. Thank you for sharing. So there are quite a few folks with us, and some folks are asking questions. I'll give the folks online here a minute to remember. You can pop your questions into the question and answer function, or you can link them up in the chat. But before we hop into your questions, I just wanted to remind folks to consider making a donation for the Land Trust to help protect these habitats that these birds need. Your support really does protect the places for these amazing critters, and hopefully you'll be able to get out to the lands you can help us protect and see some of these birds we've been talking about. You can become a member by donating using the Facebook donation button or visiting our website at DeschutesLandTrust.org/support. So let's jump into questions. I've got one here first that's pretty specific, and we'll start with it. Where are good places to see mountain bluebirds? Any recommendations, Ben?
Yes. Smith Rock is a great place to see mountain bluebirds. You can see them in prairie-like habitat or even sagebrush, shrub scrub. Even if you're, I've seen them just driving around in between Tumalo area and Redmond, kind of downslope. And you can also see them kind of on the edge of woods, but I associate them with more open shrub scrub and prairie grassland habitat with interspersed trees. So if you are near a place where that is, then that's where I would look. Sometimes you'll see them just off the side of the road driving by.
Great, Ben. You've got lots of thank yous coming in the chat, but we'll pass by the thank yous and go to the next question. Do you have any resources you might recommend for a beginning birder? And I know the Land Trust just put up a different video that you made with us, kind of talking through how to get started birding. So we'll make sure to share that video in the follow-up information from today's event. But anything off the top of your mind that's good for a beginning birder to have, even websites of where to find some of these calls and things that you mentioned?
Yes, and I'm glad somebody asked that, because I forgot to put a slide of resources that I use for this presentation that I use frequently. So so here we are. The Sibley bird guides are great. There is a number of apps that you can use on your phone that are free, including Audubon, and Cornell Lab of Ornithology has an app called Merlin, which is also free. Sibley has a free version. And so that would be a great place to start, is get yourself a field guide. Audubon, Peterson's, or Sibley are all fantastic field guides. I would recommend, go check out that video that Rebecca mentioned. My preference on field guides are ones with paintings as opposed to pictures, because it gives you an idealized image of how to see that bird. And photographs oftentimes will have poor lighting or different weird angles. And so I recommend a field guide with paintings.
Super, thanks. And we'll be sure to link to some of those resources for folks specifically. Nancy has a specific question about the mountain bluebird, and she was confused about the rufous breast. So could you help her distinguish between a mountain and a western bluebird?
Yeah, so a western bluebird will have more of a rufous breast, and a mountain bluebird will be just blue, all blue or gray. And so that would be and then on the western bluebird, that rufous kind of extends back around its shoulder, just below its neck as well. So that's kind of the deal with that.
And for us beginner birders, like for me is who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's like orangey red coloring?
Yeah. So, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. That's, yep. Rufous tends to mean orange or reddish. Yeah.
Kind of
Thanks for
rusty.
that clarification. Yeah.
Let's see. Got plenty of more questions. What's the next one we should ask? Got a question here from Archie. So generally, people wanting to encourage more birds to come to their homes, but wanting to be really responsible and respectful bird feeder owners. Do you have any guidance on bird feeders, or specifically is salmonellosis, something like that, still a problem here? Any bird feeder recommendations?
Yes, Archie, I'm glad you asked that, because so there's been an outbreak of salmonella in the Bay Area for pine siskins, which can happen when they have what's called eruptive years, or it just means there's a lot of that bird that particular year. And that can be just because they have a higher population density. And so the thing that I would recommend is, if you see a bird beneath your feeder that is dead, then that would be a good reason to take your bird feeder down and not only clean it, but maybe just bring it in, so that there's not a bunch of different birds, a bunch of heterospecifics or birds of different species congregating in one area. That being said, I think that bird feeders in general are a great way to provide food resource, especially in the late winter and early spring for our birds. And that's a debate that people talk about, that I think would be just worth you going and kind of doing your own research on whether or not that's something that you want to do. But I think the overall bird feeders are a great way to have birds come to your home and also provide a good food resource.
I've got another kind of similar home bird situation question. So some folks had swallows building nests in their doorway, and they were pooping all over. Is there any way that they can still support the swallows, but maybe minimize the poop situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I recommend is, if you want your swallows to be around, you can build some simple swallow boxes and put them out kind of in the open where they can be used, and they will use them. You want to make sure that the hole is small enough so that non-native birds like European starlings won't come in and use that nest and pull out the swallow young. And what I would say is, you could probably, I know you can look up, I don't have it on top of my head, but you can look up bird box sizes for different species of birds, be it bluebirds or woodpeckers or swallows. And you can build a trap door at the bottom, so you can clean out the bottom in the wintertime. And then once you've shooed those birds away, the ones that are pooping all over your front door, you could maybe put up something like some type of metal netting or something that keeps them from using that nesting platform resource that your house is so kindly providing.
Yes, a home for many, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple more questions, and we only have a little bit more time. We're not going to get to all of them, everyone, but I'm going to get to as many as we can. So let's see. We've got someone saying, I'm looking to get out and start birding now, and I'm going to try to see if I can find any of these birds you just taught me about. Where would you recommend that I might go to have a good chance of seeing any of them?
Yes. Well, I think in our area and in the West in general, if you go near water, you're going to see a good portion of these animals. Water is a limiting resource in our landscape and in our environment. So if you can be near water, especially as we get further into the period of migration, so later into April and early May, you'll see a lot of these birds. I think I forgot to mention, like the Lewis's woodpecker, that really beautiful green and salmon. I've seen those at Shevlin Park a lot, especially if you're up on that upper trail looking back down into the stream channel, you'll see those birds quite a bit. So go to water and you'll usually have good success. Oh, and the Hatfield Ponds is another great place to go birding because you've got ducks and kind of a shrub scrub habitat with mixed juniper woodland. So that's another good spot.
Super. Thanks, Ben. And it wouldn't be a land trust birding presentation if I didn't say something about Camp Polcamato Preserve. Seems to be a good spot too. And we have bird lists on our website there with some photos and a brochure to help out beginning birders. So that'll be linked in the resources. 2 more questions. So we got to speed through them.
Cool.
This one is not an easy question.
Okay.
How is climate change affecting the migrations of these birds, and will we stop being able to see some of them?
Well, I think one thing that is happening with climate change is where birds are hanging out I don't think it will stop where birds from migrating. They're going to continue to do their thing to capitalize on food resources, but where those resources are might change. And one thing that is happening is we're seeing various taxa and various animals are moving upslope or further north. And so the ranges are starting to shift, it seems, for certain birds. And I think another thing that will happen is you'll just see birds either sooner, or maybe they're hanging out later before they head back to wherever they migrated from. Or you'll just see more what are called vagrant birds that you might not expect to see in an area like the Western scrub jay, California scrub jay. So anyway, that's probably
good short answer to a big question. Thanks, Ben. And I'll send you off with this last question. Do you have an all-time favorite bird?
Gosh, well, not really. I mean, there's so many birds that are amazing, and I probably go through phases. But I will say this: that the bird that got me really into birds is the California condor, which is such a charismatic, huge, amazing animal. And I used to never think birds were all that interesting, and then started hanging out with condors, and that all changed, and here we are today. So I'll leave you with that.
Well, then we all owe a huge thank you to the condor, and from everyone in the chat and the comments and myself, thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your time and your knowledge. That's about all the time we've got. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will have more virtual events about wildflowers and bones and other kinds of things, I believe otters, later this year. So check out our calendar. Thanks again for all those who contributed to our conservation work today. And we'll hope to see you again next time. Any last words, Ben?
Have a great time getting out looking for birds. Now's the time.
All right. Happy birding, everyone. See you again soon.